impact investing opens your eyes to investment opportunities that you wouldn't see otherwise, because it allows you to see not just the financial and the economic value of a startup, but how it could change the world.
So Nancy and I met decades ago when we were two of the very, very few focused on this sector. This sector meaning at the time, there wasn't a moniker, impact investing.
Way back in the early 2000s, we were early in the belief that there was no sacrifice going after returns for investors and trying to change the world for the better.
To say this was margin might be an exaggeration of just how marginalized this industry was.
The first time I met Nancy was an introduction from Elon Musk. He had different investors in Tesla in the early days. And he said, this is the one investor you need to speak to. Out of all the investors that we spoke to, he was the only investor that was really focused on double bottom line investments, meaning a company that is going to do well, sell good products or good service, but at the same time have a positive impact on our environment.
She has the skill set to see a need and go down a path that others would not go down. She saw Tesla before it became Tesla of today.
There's an opportunity just to switch everything relied on gas to an electric mode.
What epitomizes Nancy and everything she does is that determination and grit and hard work. It's coupled with an authenticity and passion around the idea of truly focusing on impact investing.
We had no idea how difficult it would be to convince people that you can still make money and do good at the same time. That was a fairly heretical viewpoint back then.
So we set out to show the world that actually they were not mutually exclusive, but the first and second bottom line, if done right, was mutually reinforcing.
When you're involved in work that is breaking the mold, you're sort of an underdog. Part of being an underdog is understanding that in order to move into the mainstream, it's going to take time, and you have to focus on that long game. And now, of course, it's bigger than any of us. We have signaling value because people understand that we are experts in balancing investor returns with social and environmental progress, that when we choose to invest in a company in a sector that people have not invested in before, people wake up and take note of that. There were two phases to my developing a broader sense of the role of activism. One was, as a child, I was influenced, obviously, by my parents. I'm a hybrid of their interests. My father was a patent attorney, he was an inventor, he was an entrepreneur. Meanwhile, my mother was very involved in local politics, in community organizations. Together, you kind of get the beginnings of someone that's interested in social change, but also in business and the role of technology, the role of innovation in social change. I did grow up in the 70s. There were demonstrations against nuclear power, against the Vietnam War. It was just a common element of society. And then when I went to college, I was able to really move beyond just demonstrating. It was there that I learned that if you feel strongly about something and you do an experiment or you do a project that shows some data to support whatever it is you're fighting for, you have a lot of power.
In the early 80s, she got a job. Her first major job was with Intel Corporation. And from Intel, she then evolved into venture capital with Hambrick and Quiff.
At H&Q, I had this hybrid role where I was both a venture capital investor, but I also ran our political work, our community affairs, our charitable giving. At H&Q, we went public, and then we were acquired by Chase right around the dot-com era. And then Chase acquired JP Morgan. You can imagine, having worked at the same firm for since 1984, to have all this happening. We're going public, we're getting acquired, and then to compound that, my boss, who was also a friend, Dan Case, the CEO of H&Q, at that time was diagnosed with glioblastoma, a fatal kind of brain cancer. He was the rock of our firm, and he was just an amazingly charismatic, supportive, brilliant person, and now he had to wrestle with this disease that was so serious. What it did is it made me examine what are my priorities. I was open to new ideas, and the Bay Area Council, our regional business group, came to us and said, we want to start a venture capital fund that pays attention to putting the benefits of entrepreneurship in neighborhoods that haven't benefited during the dot-com boom. That's when the light bulb went off. This is a way to make venture capital investments locally, but also to pay attention to the inequity of wealth distribution. I said, wow, yeah, we should do this. And Dan, even though he was wrestling with his own disease, he supported me. I didn't know if I was qualified, and he said, well, Nancy, you've had 2 jobs. You've been a venture capitalist. You do all this political and policy stuff. You're just going to put those 2 jobs together, and for once you'll have 1 job as opposed to 2. It was like, that's true, so maybe I can do this.
There's always some challenges when you evolve and go from an institutional structure to something more that's a startup structure. There's always some question and answers, self-doubt, but I said, go for it.
We know that in order to do something meaningful, it's going to be difficult. And it was pretty difficult, and so having Phil there, I don't think I could have done it without him. I have just benefited in so many ways from his support, particularly when I left JP Morgan to found DBL.
When you start any new venture, as we did together, one could only hope for someone who has been as committed as Nancy has been to our partnership.
We were early, and early in the belief that there was no sacrifice going after returns for investors and trying to change the world for the better. It was a controversial notion when we started, way back in the early 2000s.
Our mission was to invest in purpose-driven entrepreneurs. In the early days, it was filled with skeptics and naysayers. Being at DBL, one of the things that is unique, of course, is that we focus on first bottom line, traditional financial return. And Nancy and I each came from, and the partners here were financial investors first. But it's unique to actually have this holistic approach. The idea that we actually bring to bear this real focus around a second bottom line.
The way we are able to decide what to invest in integrates the traditional financial analysis with a social analysis or an environmental analysis. That's where you are able to take those risks that perhaps you wouldn't if you didn't have that lens.
And when I see Nancy on the board she's on, when I think about the value add she provides, there are plenty of investors who do one or the other. But the idea of this integrated approach, where you do all the things that a traditional VC does around financing, recruiting, business development, strategy, all the things a typical board member might do if you were a traditional VC, but bringing to bear a policy perspective, a community engagement aspect. The idea that there's been years of experience developing how one truly practices second bottom line. That makes Nancy a very special board member to have.
She was an early investor in Tesla. She was an early investor, also second investor in SolarCity. She has this unique gift of identifying early companies that have good products or services, that has a positive impact, and she knows how to choose the winners. Go back to 2006. Back then, the likelihood of a successful electric vehicle car manufacturer was extremely, extremely low. She looked at that. She knew that is the transition that we have to have. And she backed that company and supported that company.
I was an anthropology major in college, and a lot of what anthropology teaches you is how do societies work? How do cultures thrive? We're not tearing down society and saying everything has to change, but we are understanding that investing just for financial return was increasingly not enough for people.
The ability to juggle so many different things. I mean, I think it's got to be incredibly hard to have been able to do all of that between being so devoted to us and our activities and her work.
In college, she would fly 3,000 miles for like most of my races. And so it's like, while handling all this work side of her, she still showed up to like every sporting event that I had and like had dinner on the table and still like it was family hangout time.
She's always, exercising. Like she seems like she's never has a second of free time, which I don't know how she does it personally. that's not me at all. But
you don't want to be on Peloton for 3 hours a day?
Yeah, I'm good on that. But you can't help but appreciate and be inspired by that mindset of constantly pushing for more in every way of life.
Nancy's it's like everything. Nancy is highly committed to whatever she does.
We've been able to make it work over the years because we were both there for each other and for our children, and knew that it was priority and didn't want to outsource it all. We drew some boundary lines early that while we're committed to our causes and our careers, that the family was the central organizing principle, if you would, and that it was something that would transcend all of our other efforts. I really wanted to be a hands-on mom. I wanted to do as much as I could.
She cares a lot and is heavily invested in like being there for support when needed, but also knowing when it's like, our time to make her own decisions.
I think that she definitely cares about everything. She always wants to know every detail, which I'm sure that all moms are like that to a certain extent, but she's definitely always rooting for you and being the biggest fan and coming up with ideas, which you might not always want to hear, but you appreciate them in hindsight again, that she's always thinking about how you can be the best person you can be. We like to joke that she's got a degree in almost everything, pretty much.
Yeah.
Which, it's a lot of ways she does, but she's
she likes
not
to say
afraid
most
to
people
share her knowledge freely, liberally.
Yeah, she cites most people as her stats, so we still don't know who these most people are. But on the inspiring point, I would say that, both parents really, and like our mom has shown us that, just find what you're passionate about and like contribute to it. And also she instilled, along with my dad, of like give back to your community in some way. She's found a way to give back and tied it to her career, and then has, with the partnership of my dad, kind of outlined of like, the expectation as a citizen is to find some way to give back. And then they both kind of walk the walk with that, and that's what I find inspiring, that I hope to continue to do.
I have so respected about Nancy's journey is that over the years, Nancy has truly given back to the field of impact as it's evolved.
We want to continue the sustainability practice. We want to allow young people to grow up and work at these kinds of companies so that we have our own corporate sustainable icons to believe in. That's a pretty audacious goal, but you knock them off one sector at a time, one company at a time, and pretty soon the world does look different.
And while in those early days when we started, that term impact investing wasn't even around, now the amount of time that Nancy dedicates to going to universities around the globe, talking to students, interfacing with professors who themselves want to teach impact, and the idea of truly trying to spread some of the lessons, the learnings, over these many years around impact means that the impact that Nancy and DBL is having isn't just the relatively modest-sized fund that we run and manage, but more importantly, trying to spread that so that the field of impact can widen. And one of the things that Nancy and I and our team often say is, we're going to keep doing this until the idea of impact investing just becomes investing.
When you work in a field, you don't always kind of look up and see what's going on around you. You're just trying to get your own work to be successful. And so the fact that it's become this movement is, of course, we're very proud to DBL to have been there at the beginning and to help form it. It's such a new field that we need everybody. And when you look at my background, you know, an anthro major, working in tech, working for Intel, going into finance. I mean, I did not have the traditional training. I didn't even know what a venture capitalist was when I was in college. You can make that happen, and that's why I'm so excited about this scholarship program, is that it's a pivotal step for young women to be able to access the instruction, the intellectual firepower, the network, and the friendship for their future. And I'm an example of that, where I really went in very untrained and was able to stitch together a career that you know, where I found meaning and fulfillment. We're going to do it. We're reducing our carbon footprint. We're going to create the incentives to move massive amounts of commercial and ag activity into a low carbon footprint. And we're also going to build resilience. We're going to adapt to climate change in a way that preserves life on Earth as we know it and for future generations. And again, I mentioned I was an anthropology major. And so Margaret Mead, who of course is a famous anthropologist and helped to build the field and the respect that people have for the field, she had this quote that we kind of live by at DBL, which is, never doubt the ability of a small group to change the world. Indeed, it is the only group that has. You know, it kind of sums up our life, our work, because we're just a small group of people and entrepreneurs and finance folks, but we know that we have power and that we have agency to change the world ahead of when the world understands what we're doing.